Thank you, Debbie. That was great. Just a quick reminder that this is one in a series of webinars. This is the first one by the Biodiversity Task Force, but we have more exciting events in the near future as well. We'll keep you posted. Well, I'd like to open the door to Mariana Sarmiento, already introduced by Debbie. Just let me tell you that the habitat banking is a very interesting tool, and Mariana has played an important pioneering role in its development in Colombia and has visualized the applicability in other countries. With that, Mariana, please take the floor. Tell us about habitat banking. How is it working? What is it? How is it working? And how can we benefit from it at a macro level as well as for individual projects?
Thank you, Walter. First of all, thank you for having me. Terrasos is part of the 2020 initiative, and we're 100% convinced that this is the kind of platforms that we need to make sure that we can drive finance to biodiversity conservation and restoration. So with that, I'm going to share sort of generally what a habitat bank is, but I want to tie it to one of the experiences that we've had with one of our pilot projects. So it's not just theory, but we kind of go back between theory and practice. The opportunity is big, and we need more players in this field to be able to make sure that we capture all the potential. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and please,
yes,
if you can confirm that you're seeing the screen.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to be talking about habitat banks, and as I'm talking about habitat banks, I have to talk about biodiversity credits as well. So I'm going to be touching on that a little bit. And this is an innovation conservation model that we launched in Colombia a few years ago with the help of the IDB Lab, the Inter-American Development Bank, private sector laboratory, and we were certain that this model is applicable to other countries in Latin America. But what's the context of this, and why do we need this? There are two challenges that we're now facing, besides the biodiversity crisis, but we have no net loss regulations in place by different countries. And now we're seeing nature positive commitments by companies and countries as well. So how do we achieve that in an efficient manner, where we're moving from a situation where we're just thinking about planting trees, but we're thinking holistically about what's in the forest and how can we really drive biodiversity conservation and natural ecosystem restoration. So this is where habitat banks fit in. All our habitat banks are designed over a 30-year horizon, thinking about that 2050 goal. So that's where we are. And the nature of habitat banks respond to a problem that we identified not only in biodiversity offset implementation, which is a component of those no net loss regulations, but also generally about biodiversity conservation initiatives. And that is summarized in dispersed interventions. Everybody has its own offset somewhere, wherever they could find the land or the landowner. It's not typically results oriented. Oftentimes biodiversity offsets, it's a 3-year commitment. Once the trees are planted, the operator or the manager leaves, and those trees are kind of left there. And in few situations, that actually leads to true biodiversity conservation results. And then the end result is that money's being wasted. In the case of Colombia, billions of dollars need to be invested in biodiversity offsets by law. And what we've seen is that a lot of that money hasn't ended in long-lasting permanent conservation projects. So that's the main problem. And this is kind of where Habitat comes in. What we're doing is we're identifying big chunks of land, relatively speaking. And by that, I mean, where habitat banks have a place where conserving 500 hectares, 300 hectares is very important for that ecosystem. So that's about our average size. And what we're able to do is for those projects that are within that watershed and within the same ecosystem where we have our project, they can do their offsets. They don't have to go out and find a landowner, go through the hassle of doing that. Most of the companies that need to offset, their main business is not conservation or restoration. It's building roads, it's building energy infrastructure. So we are facilitating not only finding the areas where they can do the offsets, but also making sure that those projects deliver the biodiversity results that they need for compliance. And within a habitat bank, there's early investment in setting up the project, but doing the early conservation and restoration actions. Land is insured, meaning before we sell any kind of credit, land is secured for at least 30 years by engaging and signing contracts with landowners. It's a results-based payment, so it ends up aligning everybody's interest. Our landowners, operators, and the companies, we all need to reach that kind of success milestone, and that's when the Habitat Bank is paid. Terrasos works under kind of a structure where we have 30-year financial and legal assurances, meaning our contracts with landowners are for 30 years, and we set up trust funds in order to manage all the money that we receive, whether it's in the investment kind of early in the project or later on when we're receiving payments from the clients. And finally, there's an accounting methodology which we report on to the Ministry of Environment. And right now we're migrating to blockchain, which we think will give it even more traceability. So how does it work? First, the project is developed and established. There is a technical and the whole kind of assurance and legal assurance. We define the number of credits. We do the management plan. We sign all the contracts. We register the project with the Ministry of Environment. And only when that occurs, companies that have offset requirements can buy those credits. There is a contract between the company and the Habitat Bank that's established. We set performance and management milestones that are determined within the contract, and payments are only made when those milestones are achieved. The benefit of this for companies is obvious in the sense that they're reducing the financial risk of deploying these activities by themselves. And on the side of the Habitat Bank and everybody that's part of it, everybody's very focused on making sure that we can achieve those conservation outcomes so that we get paid. So what's in a credit? What are we selling and what does that credit represent? 1 hectare is equal to 1 credit, and the price of that credit includes land finding and all the contracts, the management plan, baseline surveys, landowner incentives, implementation and monitoring for 30 years, reporting, trust management, easement holding, auditors, general management, and also insurance, right? So it's a full kind of service in a way that's delivered in that credit. This is just an example. This was our pilot project that we deployed with the IDB lab. And this is a site in the Meta region of Colombia where there's a lot of oil and gas activity, and therefore a lot of offset requirements from that sector. This is a cattle ranch that was abandoned at one point because of the internal conflict within Colombia. And when we arrived there a few years ago, the ranch was just for cattle grazing, right? So what we did was identify those areas that were best suited for cattle grazing. We identified forest areas and that needed to be restored or conserved, and that the family wanted to maintain. And that's where we set up the habitat bank. In this case, it's these two areas. Now we're actually expanding a little bit more because it has been so successful. But the end result is that we've increased the hectares that are now productive for these landowners. Okay. And when you think about the model, no, this is just conceptual. We have some areas where nature conservation and restoration is happening. Some other areas in this particular ranch, they're now doing regenerative cattle grazing. And then in the areas where there's forest and where we're doing restoration, we have our habitat bank, which allows us to generate biodiversity credits, which we're selling. And now we're beginning to identify other compatible income sources from non-timber forest products, honey, beekeeping, etc. And additionally, one of the things that we do as part of our implementation and as part of our risk management is community engagement. And our community engagement starts with education. And the reason why we have this approach is because these are 30-year contracts. These are 30-year projects at least. And we know that these are the generations that are either going to take care of these project sites or that are tomorrow going to light a fire or come in and take down the wood or come in and do illegal hunting. So this is part of kind of the intervention strategy. What drives what we're doing? Again, I mentioned biodiversity offsets. This is in Colombia's regulation, where we have kind of three main decrees or resoluciones. One is a requirement of 1% capex of projects that needs to be invested in watershed conservation. Another is biodiversity offsets. That is a requirement of a 1:2 or 1:10 offset ratios, depending on the type of ecosystem that has been impacted. And then finally, there's a regulation which we actually helped design, which is the minimum standards for habitat banks. Why is this important in the context of kind of those goals for 2050 and 2030? Business as usual in terms of an offset kind of happens like this. Impacts occur, biodiversity decreases, and only when that company decides to, or feels like, or has a clear mandate from the agency, that biodiversity begins to increase, right? This creates negative externalities because of those time lags. And what we're able to do with habitat banks is come in, read where those offset requirements are going to occur on the landscape, find land, find landowners, and begin investing early on in conservation and restoration. We can internalize those externalities, and we can bring in private investment to deliver restoration and conservation outcomes today, which is when we actually need them. So in effect, we're accelerating investment in conservation and restoration. This is where we are right now. There are a few dots that we're missing, but we have about 2,300 hectares under management in different parts of the country. Those logos that you see there are the key partners that have not only believed in this model, but are now clients of ours and are seeing the benefits of this model. And I want to point out something in this map, and it's that as you can see, a lot of the carbon sinks in Colombia are the Chocó region and the Amazon region, right? And that's where a lot of the carbon projects are taking place. But for areas such as the dry tropical forest or the more fragmented Andean regions, carbon markets have a hard time kind of playing because of the size of the projects. And this is where biodiversity credits and habitat banks make a ton of sense, and they become complementary to kind of where carbon markets can operate in the country. And then finally, from I spoke a lot about the financial assurance and how we're working on a 30-year time scale. This is kind of what implementation costs look like over a 30-year horizon. But one thing that we're able to do, again, is we're selling all our credits between year 1 and year 13 at the maximum. But our projects last 30 years, correct? So what we're able to do is, as we're receiving payments, between 10 and 20% of that goes to a trust. That's our sustainability account that begins to increase, which is this one. And it begins to operating once we've sold all our credits, right? And this is what gives us the permanence and the financial sustainability of the Habitat Bank projects. And this is a lot of where the innovation, happens. And then finally, just to kind of wrap up and how you can see how this lands kind of in the landscape. Right now, just in the Meta project, 622 hectares of natural ecosystems conserved and restored and financially secured. This project is creating 23 permanent jobs that go from, local community members to PhDs that are doing, biodiversity surveys and such. Productivity per hectare has increased by 100% for landowners. We've created new additional income streams for landowners, estimated at $20,000 US for their operating services. Savings in land taxes. We've been spending all our providers are from these rural municipalities, in this case San Martin, and we're spending all the money there. We're being able to target clients that need from 150 credits to only 1.5. And this is very important because we are truly, solving an issue and a headache for the clients. This results in savings for those companies of at least $200,000 in consulting services that they no longer need. And savings in time for clients range from 7 months in delivering compliance documentation. This is kind of our track record. I won't go into detail, but how have we been able to do this? It's a blended finance mechanism so far, where we have had the privilege of working with great partners such as the IDB Lab, as well as USAID and the Partnership for Forest program from the UK government. And they've provided a lot of the resources to set up these banks, to set up the model. But we've sold more than 331 biodiversity credits, which represent more or less $3 million in contracts. And again, we've participated in the design of that public policy of habitat banks in Colombia. Where are we moving towards? And I'll end shortly. Is we've
Mariana,
demonstrated
two more minutes, Mariana.
Yeah, 2 more minutes. We've demonstrated that the model works for the compliance market, but we know that there is a need and also an appetite for this within the voluntary kind of market. So we've developed a protocol for credit issuing, again backed by blockchain, and now we're beginning to pilot this market. So again, the way forward and where we think in order to have more habitat banks, more private investment in this kind of market, Policies that outline no net loss and net gain are key, whether they're company goals or national government goals. And in the end, in order to have habitat banks lead to high integrity markets, we need minimum standards for habitat banks and biodiversity credits, rules of the game that are cleared to ensure permanence and additionality, insisting on performance-based payments, registry systems, and accounting systems. With that, I'll end. And again, Walter and everybody, thank you so much.
Mariana, many, many thanks. Thanks for keeping the time. Very interesting indeed. We have a number of questions, many questions. I ask you, Mariana, to try to answer some of those in the chat, but we'll have a little bit of time at the end to discuss a few questions in the open. With that, I'm very happy to now set the floor to Adam Drucker. He is Mr. Biodiversity Credits, and is a tool that has been developed by Bioversity in the cooperation with others. We're very happy to have him join the webinar. Adam, please take the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. So, well, thank you very much for this opportunity to be able to present on payments for Agrobiodiversity Conservation Services, which in Spanish we refer to as RESCA, either as recompensas or retribuciones para los servicios de conservación de la agrobiodiversidad. And I'm presenting also on behalf of my colleague, Marlene Ramirez, who is the head of our Peru office. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, the world depends on a very narrow range of crops and varieties, and indeed some 3 crops provide 60% of the world's food energy, and some 12 together with 5 animal species provide 75% of the world's food. This is a tiny proportion of the number of crops used by humans, and indeed the number of plant species that exist. So diversity is important, and from a economics perspective, I come to this from a ecological economics perspective. Conventional economics tends to count really what are only the direct use values. So things that are produced, but we know that the indirect use values, which are largely associated with ecosystem services, are also very important, and in some cases even more valuable. And the distinction between the private goods, which farmers produce something and can sell it, to the public goods, which are of benefit to the country and the world, and are much harder for farmers to capture the benefit from without some incentive mechanism being in place. And so it's the existence of these public good values that really justifies that we should undertake interventions. And of course, one of the main differences between wild biodiversity and agrobiodiversity is that the latter is the result of millennia of interaction between farmers and the environment and selection processes. So it's important that we maintain that underlying evolutionary process. It's not just a question of fencing off the forest, for example, and we're also interested in maintaining the indigenous knowledge and cultural practices that go along with that. Now, at the same time, there is a strong argument always being made that for whatever it is that we want to conserve, we can essentially develop a market for it. So from this kind of diversity, we can move to this, or from this, which is some of the threatened quinoa varieties we've been working on in Peru, you can move to this. I will come back to the quinoa milk example towards the end of my presentation. But essentially, there's a challenge here. Again, I take examples from Peru, but this applies more generally everywhere in the world. There are many varieties out there, yet we only find, let's say, half a dozen in the supermarket. And so this, of course, presents a challenge, because for any priority conservation portfolio that we can define, and I'll come back to that point in a minute also, perhaps only a small part of that has a market potential. And there are also challenges with the market development approach as well in terms of cost and time horizons and so on. So essentially, we need some complementary incentive mechanism, and this is where payment for agrobiodiversity conservation services comes in. It's about prioritization in terms of deciding what it is that we want to conserve. It's about minimizing the cost so we can conserve as much as possible for a given conservation fund. That's where the use of competitive tenders comes into PACs. It's also not all just about cost effectiveness, but also about taking social equity criteria into account. So we would like to select communities where perhaps there are more women farmers involved, or younger farmers, or poorer farmers, or particular ethnic groups. So that whole social equity part can also be taken into account. As with conventional payment for ecosystem services, which is of course where PACs comes from originally, although widely applied, PES has not until recently been applied to agrobiodiversity per se. We pay in kind. By in kind, that is rewards defined by the farmer groups themselves and at a group level. So we're not talking about cash in the hands of individuals as in many more conventional PES approaches. So all of this leads to, we consider, a high level of participatory justice and helping to implement the putting into practice farmers' rights and fair and equitable sharing of the benefits. It supports a range of international conventions as well as national regulatory frameworks as well, of course. And ultimately, what we seek to achieve is a diversification of farmers' livelihoods so that they can sell not only an agricultural product, as they've always done, but also one for the provision of a public good conservation service for the benefit of the country and the world. And over the last decade or so, there have been a number of small-scale implementations, although these are starting to add up now. So we've worked on almost 400 threatened crop varieties from 10 major crops across 4 countries, with almost 2,700 farming households benefited so far. And this is what it looks like with quinoa and amaranth in Peru, here in Guatemala, with maize and beans and potato, in Ecuador with maize. We've also, of course, worked outside of Latin America, for example, with crop wild relatives, and some experiences in Europe with livestock as well. So the first step in all of this really is about deciding what it is to conserve, that is to say, what is to board onto Noah's Ark. I really always like this image because at the time it didn't seem necessary to conserve any crops, but that's definitely not the case today. So both crops and livestock PACs can be applied to. And here's an example of how we did our prioritization, where there is sufficient ex situ data that has been collected. So here, looking at cacao populations, you can see from the phylogenetic tree there that, for example, the Criollo population is very distinct from some of those other populations, so receives the highest priority in terms of conservation. We're trying to conserve the most diversity for a given conservation fund. So the contribution to overall diversity is important. Criollo is doing that in this case, whereas others that may be threatened, like Iquitos or Nanay, are much more closely related, so perhaps a lower priority. With that, you can map where it is you should be working. You can then get into more participatory approaches. So here, the 4-cell method, which was originally developed by colleagues of ours in Nepal, and using farmer knowledge to help classify different varieties in the communities between those which are found on large areas with many households. Those would be the more commercial varieties, to those in the lower right cell there of small areas and few households. And you'll see from the potato image there, when we say small areas, some of those are just a few lines within a farmer's field. So using that information, and of course inspired by all of those Far West wanted posters, we've developed our own here too. So farming communities have an opportunity to contribute their valuable information and knowledge into identifying what it is that we should be conserving. And through the application of the conservation tenders and so on, and we have a very nice video, the links at the end, you can see more about the actual PACS process that leads to this. But we see that some communities are much more willing to participate, expressed in terms of cost here, of course, because of their own preferences and cultural habits and so on, are really interested in maintaining those threatened native varieties, whereas other communities at the more expensive end of this graph, perhaps more interested just in commercial varieties. So it's much more cost effective to be able to identify which communities at the lower end of this scale that we can work with. The other very nice thing about PACS is the extremely high level, colorful, participatory reward handover events. You can see some examples of the rewards at the back of the first picture there. Sometimes surprising kinds of rewards are requested, like you can see on the car, on the minibus going away there, mattresses. I've developed a new understanding that a good conservation farmer is a well-rested conservation farmer as well. And the press and vice ministers and so on all turn up for that. And very interesting as well to be able to analyze the different kinds of rewards that farmers request. Some obviously they will divide between themselves. These are proportionally or on a more egalitarian basis. But others, such as threshing and drying machinery, that they're obviously going to use as a group. And in the bottom right there, school materials, which would obviously be of benefit to the whole community, not just the farmer group that we've been working with.
Adam,
in terms of the effectiveness.
2 minutes, Adam.
I'm sorry?
2 minutes.
Okay, in terms of the effectiveness here, defining a conservation goal, the gray column, and then the actual status of the different colors of 7 varieties of quinoa we have here. The negative red columns are the gap between the conservation goal and the current status. And you can see in terms of area here that the PACS interventions have been effective and have also guided future interventions. And in terms of farmer numbers as well, that has been effective. We have happy farmers. I'll have to go through these rather quickly, but here are some quotes from them. You will notice that seed is an issue. Rare variety seed is not always easily obtainable, and it takes a number of years for us to have a sufficient amount to reach the conservation goal. And as I said, the preferences of farmers are what maintain these varieties. It's not necessary to intervene every single year on the same thing. You can intervene on other things in the meantime, and with adequate monitoring, you can determine when it is an appropriate time to re-intervene. Costs are relatively low. So here an example of conserving 300 varieties of across a number of crops, less than $200,000 a year, a tiny proportion of the funds that go into conventional agricultural subsidies. Sometimes we also get lucky. We have an example here of an actual product that was developed from one of the threatened varieties through collaboration with a private company, Caipacha Foods, Muyu Milk now. From what was threatened, the Ministry of Environment has now declared this to be not threatened. There are more than 23 hectares of this variety of chulpi being produced. Other opportunities that we'd like to explore in the future is taking advantage of public food procurement programs. They buy huge quantities of food in Peru, even with a mandate for supporting local purchases and farmers. Much of it is bought from big companies in the capital city. There's a range of environmental impacts here. This is just global warming potential, but we're in the future would like to look at the biodiversity benefits as well. Some of those rare varieties have important nutritional profiles, for example, high in iron content, so good for combating anemia, which is endemic in many countries. And so this would be a way of generating a sustainable demand for these rare varieties. I've just got a couple more slides here. There is a lack of funding, and that we need to overcome. And so, just to wind up, some key take-home messages. As I said, farmers are able to diversify their livelihoods to providing a public good conservation service as well, and being a key strategic partner of the state. It's an important complementary incentive mechanism to market development, particularly when we have portfolios that do not necessarily have, not everything in it has a market potential. And it's a proven, cost-effective approach informed by science and capable of taking into account social equity considerations. It's not expensive. We're losing a lot of our diversity because of a lack of minimum funding. We urgently need implementation of systematic monitoring system. We need establishment of consensus about what the conservation goals we're trying to achieve are. And there are these win-win opportunities, as with the public food procurement programs. So a few years ago, the CGIAR recognized this as an innovative tool that should be promoted in the region, and with the Plant Treaty and the FAO's Commission for Genetic Resources. We've, of course, done that to some extent, but we continue to look for opportunities to upscale this further in the countries we've been working in, and in other countries as well. So I look forward to continuing discussions about that with everybody who's here today. And there's the link to the video that I mentioned. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Amazing, amazing. As with the case of habitat banking, what it strikes me is that you have very limited resources right now, very in extension, modest area covered, but the potential is immense. And that's one of the reasons of existence of the platform 20 by 20. We want to make sure that these pioneering experiences are replicated and expanded. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Mariana, again. And right now, I would like to pass the microphone to Maria Adelaida, who leads a very interesting program. Mariana knows about it, the Jaguar Corridor. Maria Adelaida, you have 10 minutes, regrettably. But tell us about what you think about these experiences, and also in the context of the Jaguar Corridor, any recommendations that you may have. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's exciting to hear Mariana and Adam and those great experience. We have two interesting mechanisms being explained, the habitat banking and the payments or retribuciones, as Adam called them in Spanish, for Agrobiodiversity Conservation Services. First, I would like to remark something, and it is the urgency of developing technical and financial instruments, such the ones we heard before, to value biodiversity and to value biodiversity impacts, and also to regulate them through international standards and national legislations. Also, as we have seen recently, initiatives like TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, helps to have a framework to report and act on evolving nature-related risk, and also the opportunities, because this has two sides, the risks and also the opportunities. And we saw here very clear the opportunities. These biodiversity credits, not only for the compulsory payments we have to do in certain countries like in Colombia, when we develop certain infrastructure projects, we have to compensate the damage, but also, as Mariana said, in the voluntary market, we have seen a lot of interest of some enterprises, some companies moving from carbon credits to biodiversity credits. So it will be very interesting. And also this initiative that called us today, the Biodiversity Task Force at Initiative 20 by 20. Well, I would like to remark something that Mariana said, and is the importance of having a flexible mechanism to fulfill your complaints, you fulfill what you have to do in your country, but also adding territories, and that makes it possible for small companies to be part of the instrument. I think that is something very interesting. And also related to what Adam said, is the role of the communities. The communities here are one of the main actors in all these things. And also because they are the ones who are protecting and developing the activities into the territories. And I found very interesting that rescue of traditional foods that Adam showed us, because it has also an impact on the culture. Well, and Walter asked me to make a link between these interesting presentations and what we are doing in ISA. For those who don't know Grupo ISA, we are a multi-Latin organization. We are recognized for our expertise in energy, toll roads, and telecommunication business. And we are present in Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Chile, Bolivia, Argentina, and Central America. This is to give you an idea what we do. And the interesting thing is our flagship in sustainability, it's a program called Conexión Jaguar. It is a voluntary program that we have developed to finance conservation through local communities by issuing and trading certified carbon credits under international standards. So we can see the link, because the program is not only for carbon credits. It has a special objective on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, of course, and for us to offset our own emissions, but also for the protection of biodiversity and the Jaguar Corridor in Latin America, and also the development of and empowerment of the rural communities. And I think that the last, but not the least important, to raise awareness about environmental issues, because this is a program that creates interest also in kids, in the academy, and in all kind of publics. And then why the Jaguar? Why did we choose the Jaguar as a symbol of this program? Because protecting the Jaguar is protecting the biodiversity and the ecosystems they inhabit. The jaguar is an umbrella species which plays a fundamental role in the ecosystem balance. And we know it protects water and forests, guarantees the survival of the species, and also in Latin America, for most of our indigenous communities and culture, the jaguar is considered a powerful and magical creature. And for us in Grupo ISA, it's very interesting because we have an overlap between the Jaguar Corridor through Latin America and also our infrastructure. And that's where we find a very interesting link. So I would like to show you a final video about the program and how these all objectives are integrated in one. Please, Jering.
By protecting the jaguar, we help keep forests alive, the survival of the species, and keep water flowing across the continent. At Conexión Jaguar, we protect, restore, and connect the jaguar's natural habitats in Latin America by supporting forest conservation and restoration projects. By supporting these projects, we mitigate the effects of climate change by preserving forests that are major carbon sinks, We contribute to the protection and improvement of the services offered to us by nature, the protection of biodiversity. We innovate to make community-managed conservation profitable and self-sustainable. This is accomplished by providing technical and economic support for forestry initiatives in Latin America to emit and trade high-quality carbon credits to finance conservation in the Jaguar Corridor. We contribute to sustainable development goals by supporting compliance with international agreements and helping to reduce climate impact. To change the future of the planet, we must move from theory to action. Be part of Conexión Jaguar. Support forest conservation and restoration projects, or offset your carbon footprint with us, so that together we can make a better world for future generations. If there is a connection, there is life.
Thank you, Jerry.
Very good. Thank
Okay,
you.
Walter, I finished with that.
Thank you, Mariana, and thanks for keeping the time. Sometimes I get depressed at the future and all the challenges that we are facing, but listening to Mariana, Adam, and you, Maria Adelaida, hope comes back. And I want to make sure that the platform of Initiative 2020 is a platform that is useful to you for replication, for expansion of these very pioneering efforts. With you, there is future. Thank you all for your presentations. We won't have time for the questions, but I'm asking the panelists to answer your questions directly. There is one though that hit a call with me, and that is by Diego Portugal, addressed to Mariana. How do you deal with species that are endangered? Not necessarily in the red list, but we know that locally they are under threat. Is there a special mechanism for them? Is there a differential credit for them? Mariana, if you could answer that in 30 seconds.
So our site selection process starts by identifying threatened ecosystems and also where there is high endemism. So in fact, you'll find that all our habitat banks kind of coincide with those two criteria. The national legislation doesn't say much about that. Well, what it does say is that you need to offset more if you impact one of these habitats where that is more threatened. What we did in our protocol was to give, we developed a scoring system, and those projects that have that are in locations where ecosystems are the most threatened, and therefore they're the most kind of vulnerable and threatened species, would get more credits. So that's how we're incentivizing projects to be created and developed in ecosystems that otherwise wouldn't drive, for example, climate finance. So that's how we're doing it.
Thank you, Mariana. Thanks a lot. Diego, I hope that answers your very good question. Well, it was a fantastic panel. Again, thank you all. And I want to pass the microphone to Debbie for some farewell remarks.
Thank you, Walter, and thank you, Maria and Mariana and Adam. That was incredible. I feel like I learned so much, and I feel like we need to continue this conversation, in particular with the global biodiversity framework being developed and the CBD COP coming up and the open-ended working group, and how we can bring this message forward in these conversations about financing biodiversity conversation. And the work you all are doing is amazing, and would love to continue this conversation and see how the Biodiversity Task Force of the 20 by 20 initiative can assist in facilitating these conversations, because they are so important, they're so timely, and as we all know, the time to act is now, and we have the platform, we have the stage, we have the moment, and so how we can continue these conversations. So thank you all so much for your presentations today, for the work that you do, and I look forward to engaging more on this topic. And Walter, we can talk and engage the Biodiversity Task Force and see what else we can do. So thank you, everyone.
Well said, Debbie, and a special invitation to the panelists, Maria, Adelaida, Mariana, Adam, but also to people that we know are participating and are very keen to learn more and to exert influence on this, like Marcelo Furtado and others that are listening to this. An invitation to second Debbie, an invitation for you all to continue to be engaged. Use the platform as your platform, use the Biodiversity Task Force as your task force to move this agenda forward. Many thanks to all.